Now this week I'm going to model the final 3 steps in Assessment Task 2, assuming that we're all on the same page and contemplating the final 2 weeks of work. As you can see from the study schedule, there is no new work scheduled for next week. It really is a polish and present week. So, really week 10 goes over 2 weeks. You've got 2 weeks to actually engage in this this final reflection and polishing of your mini unit. So let's get started. Let's have a look at this. What have we done? Well, basically so far we've been through weeks 1 to 6, where we've explored a range of ICTs. We've engaged in reflections on those ICTs, and now you can see how useful those reflections are going to be, because Assessment Task 2, the final stage, requires us to adopt a learner perspective on our own mini unit and reflect on the ICT processes involved. So you can actually recycle your own reflections here, assuming of course that you're using some of the ICTs that you've experimented with. The next thing we're going to do once we've done that is create a mini unit. So from our repository in week 8 we used Scoopit. Scoopit, we collected some resources. The resources were curated. We produced insights. Those insights were reviewed by our learning circle or our PLN. Based on those, we've actually selected a mini unit topic. Okay, and we're now going to develop that into a mini unit. Hopefully you're well on your way. A mini unit is 2 to 4 weeks. Now, some of you were tempted to engage in a larger unit. I mean, your mini unit can be a subcomponent of a larger unit, but really, for this assessment task, 2 to 4 weeks is a lot of teaching. It can host a range of applications and ICT techniques, and really try and limit yourself if you can to that 2 to 4 week period. We are required also, as part of this assessment item in the final stages, to produce an ICT plan. That is, from all the ICTs we've used, okay, and explored, which are we going to include in our final mini unit? Last week, for instance, I introduced you to TED-Ed. Now, a lot of people went away and thought, great, the stuff here I can use that I don't need to develop. It can be dealt with purely just by dropping it in my Weebly or in my Blogspot or making a hyperlink to it. As long as you explain the task well, you've provided the pedagogy to it. TED-Ed is a really good resource. Again, your ICT map needs to be concluded in weeks 10 to 12, and I'll give a model of one today. And the final stage is the narrative from the perspective of one of your students. Now, you have done many reflections, and they can now be recycled. As I said in last week's lecture, your plan should continue for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, so you've got structured teaching in your mini unit. So you've got a lesson sequence or a learning sequence. Phase 1, what will happen? Phase 2, phase 3. The same, for instance, with your ICT map. What ICTs will you produce at phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3? Your narrative should also be based historically. What's happening for the learner at phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3? So if you're lining up these 3 things, your mini unit learning sequence, your ICTs and your learner narrative, then it's going to be a very easy piece of reading and a very easy piece of work to produce. The role of the teacher. Now, in the past, we've gone back and had a look. The teacher has a major roles in shaping the student's learning. Now, again, we've got a couple of links here to what we call really authentic learning, exploration and discovery, knowledge creation sharing, collaboration contribution, and authentic assessment. Now that is very well replicated down here in our diagram, where we've got authenticity of learning, we've got approaches to learning, and we've got complexity to learning. And we know that we can move from a very, very simple drill and practice model, where the teacher is the sage on the stage, through to a far more complex model, where we're moving into the real world, okay, and we're gauging constructivist processes, what Russell Stannett called flipping the classroom. Okay, that's what we're doing. So when we flip the classroom, we're using digital media. And we're using digital media resources, okay, to assist students to acquire knowledge and comprehend and apply that knowledge Okay, the early stages of Bloom, knowledge and comprehension. The learner is using digital media to develop projects that require them to analyse, synthesise and evaluate. The higher end of Bloom's technology. So in weeks 1 to 6, we spent a lot of time talking about SAMR, how technology can substitute, augment, modify and redefine pedagogy. We can use technology to move from low-end to high-end pedagogies. Now, doesn't that sound an awful like your digital map? Okay, your pedagogical map in week 6 and 7. So that's what we've produced so far. Okay, we've moved from this scenario where we've got very simple instructivist teaching right through to a more complex scenario where it's real world, it's as authentic as possible, where students have moved from being consumers of teacher product through to being producers of their own co-constructed materials. In doing so, they've picked up technology. It's substituted old teaching pedagogies. It's augmented them by getting them to do new things. It's modified the product by creating new products. And it's redefined the learning environment by changing the relationships between learners, between knowledge, and between teacher and learner. And what we finished up with is a model called the contributory model of learning. Now, this is Collis and Moonen. And as you can see, it's not new. It's good 10, 11 years old and published before that. But what we've got here is the scenario where we're moving from very, very teacher-centered environments through to very, very deconstructed peer-to-peer environments. So we can see here at this early stage where the teacher is constructing knowledge. We can see here where the students are working together to test that knowledge. There's a course program. Okay, the course program is pre-structured content. Students are testing that knowledge, and they are slowly but surely reconstructing their own learner frameworks. Then they move into a community where they start to co-construct by way of assessment, by way of building their own artifacts. They start to co-construct their understanding with each other and through each other, and sometimes beyond the classroom, into panels of experts, into a range of guest speakers, into feedback mechanisms outside the classroom itself. So if we want to summarise our entire 10 weeks work, there it is in 3 diagrams. This is the purpose of assessment task number 2. Now, I'm going to take a step back again, and this time go back to I'm going to go back to Russell Stannard and just remind you of this important connection to Bloom's taxonomy. Now, Bloom's taxonomy dates back, obviously, back to the back to the 60s, sometimes to the 50s, depending on which version of Bloom you're reading. It has been modified and remodified to talk SAMR, to include technology. But really, here is the key point. When we use Bloom, we're using it to flip the classroom.
Talk a little bit. When we look at the flipped classroom, we often talk about Bloom's taxonomy, and I must admit I'm a big fan of Bloom's taxonomy. The idea behind Bloom's taxonomy is that often when we learn something, we first of all learn the basic concepts. So let's say it was a history, we would learn the basic concepts of, say, perhaps the Roman Empire and the fall of the Roman Empire. But then later we might then begin to apply that knowledge. We might compare, for example, the fall of the Roman Empire with the fall of the British Empire, or with the fall of the Soviet Union. We might look at, see if there are any parallels between the two. We begin to actually use that knowledge and link it with other knowledge. We begin to apply and analyze it and understand it better. So we move from sort of lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. And that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about using the flipped classroom. The students go home, they learn the basic basic concepts. They probably do a few quizzes or simple activities to check their basic comprehension. Then they come into the classroom, and then we try to activate that knowledge. We try to use it. For example, it might be in a language learning context where the students go home and they learn some basic vocabulary. Perhaps they look at that vocabulary in context. Perhaps they do a few exercises at home to check their basic understanding of that vocabulary. But then in the classroom, we begin to process and use that vocabulary in a context and get them to actually speak or do an activity where they would practice that vocabulary. So we move from lower order thinking to higher order thinking. So for me, there is a strong link between the flipped classroom and Bloom's taxonomy, and it's very...
And just stop Russell there. As you can see, the lower order, we flip the classroom, we farm out the comprehension and knowledge components. We then create the opportunity through some of our ICT applications to look at how that knowledge and comprehension can apply to the concepts we're trying to teach. We then bring the students together in group work in the classroom or in concept mapping online or whatever constructivist tool we decide to use to exercise or to implement the higher level components of Bloom's taxonomy. So you can see here is where you're doing your teacher work, and this is the whole purpose in flipping the classroom, to create the space via technology to do this work, to even where possible to engage technology in delivering some of the higher order outcomes. Now this can't be done all the time, but it can be done, and it all depends on system possibilities. And Education Queensland, for instance, will block many shareware components. So if you want to do something collaborative using Education Queensland facilities, it can be quite limiting. So, you know, again, it's about what's sustainable and about what's possible when you come to do your mini unit. Okay? It's about what's sustainable and what's possible. Remember, toolishness is foolishness. A little learning sequence that I've done, for instance, goes back to my time when I was teaching the baccalaureate at Cairns State High School. I also dabbled in teaching legal studies, and I put together this little resource. And I'll see if I can actually get it to open. Right, as you can see, I've done this resource as a web page. And you can see it comes direct from the Queensland QSA syllabus, Year 11 on legal studies. Now, as you know, for instance, being as you're all secondary teachers, the national curriculum only goes up to Year 10, so beyond year 10, that is Year 11 and 12, and Year 13 in some institutions, the curriculum is actually a state-based curriculum, hence the QSA syllabus. So, a simple web page. For the first time user, I've given instructions for people who've not learned this way before, and in a secondary school there are quite a few students who are new to independent learning. However, we're going to take the enter here pathway. Now, as you can see, this is just a hyperlinked web page, and there's a few things here that I've been able to do that I can't do in a normal environment. For instance, I've come up with little mnemonics. So when students see these signs, it's like navigating a roadmap. You can see here that it's a glossary, and they know that there's a glossary they can download. So one of the enhancements I'm doing, one of the technological enhancements that I would include in my ICT map, of course, is I've got download capabilities. So I have a glossary document there that's just a simple download. There are a range of other techniques involved here. This is actually a moral decision-making exercise, should I eat meat? And when you click on it, as you can probably see from the hyperlink at the bottom of the page, it is in fact a PowerPoint slideshow that the students work through in a self-paced way, which gets them to explore the law and morality. And it's all about eating meat, and it tells the wonderful story of a person who goes exploring and ultimately gets eaten by cannibals, and questions some of the theory around that. So again, with legal studies, those of you who know the syllabus will know that there's a lot of inquiry-based learning here. So hence my pedagogical intent at this stage is to create some inquiry-based learning. I'm also incorporating video. Now you can see the whole purpose of that video obviously is to shock, to hook and engage. Now again, flipping the classroom, the students were to engage in this initial stage, as you can see, a pre-unit concept test, criminal offences, an introduction, and they can click on here for instance and they can engage the concept test, which they come back to class the next day and submit. The introduction to legal studies, okay, when we look at this one, for instance, again it's another Word document. We open the Word document and what we've got here is a simple document which I can't actually drag across the page, so I won't bother. But it's just a pre-concept test and an introduction to legal studies. Now, as you can see in this mini unit, I actually very much firmly believe that students ought to have some degree of control over their own learning. And so when I look at this particular unit, I've given the objectives and educational approach, and also the subject overview. And of course in there we've got our definition of what a crime may be. Now of course the elements of crime are quite complicated and elaborated, so I've broken the actual content up into a series of modules. And for instance, they're all hyperlinked, so I can go into module 1 where I look at key legal concepts and features of the legal system, and you can see here where I'm engaging in some of the Bloom's type knowledge and comprehension activities. Again, we've got the 3 types of crime. We get into the legislature and the court hierarchies and political structures, and we also get into the elements of a crime, the mens rea and actus reus, etc., with a couple of worked examples. We then get into some particular cases, and you'll notice how these icons go, referring to your text. Here is an activity, ignorance workshop, okay, which basically says, let's shake some of your concepts. So we're cueing to the learner all the time, and then applying it to a task in a case study. So very simple design, very explicit pedagogical intent. Now, as you can see, I work through a series of units here. Now, this is my learning sequence. You can see, and again, morality, ethics and the law. And we do a little unit on prostitution there, which is, again, just a little work, 1 or 2 lessons, which looks at the history of prostitution and the whole purpose and crimes, the whole issue of whether prostitution as a victimless crime is actually a crime, whether it fits the definitions. And again, you can see the learning sequence here, the mnemonics working, telling the students what to do. Now, this is connecting behaviourism with constructivism. What do I do at this stage? Oh, I take note, it's a key idea. What do I do here? Okay, I connect this to some previous learning. I'm a reflective learner at this point. My glossary, okay, if I'm in doubt, I better go back and look at some of this. And the activity on prostitution. Again, as you can see, in this particular page, it's related to the text, and I've actually put in little cookie drops so that the students can type documents online, and every time they open this page, they'll be able to retrieve their written text. So you can see it's also interactive at that level. Now, for those of you who are teaching with Education Queensland and who've been restricted by Education Queensland systems, I came up with this design and actually just ran it in a share folder on the Year 11 drive. So you can see there that it's deliberately low tech. It doesn't require on any protocols. It doesn't require any permissions. And it can be downloaded by the students onto USB, so they can take it away and work with it on their own drive at any given point in time. So exam preparation, stimulus materials. I'm a big believer that assessment should be explicit in your learning sequence. That when students go through the modules and they can see what they've got to do, they can also see what they've got to do for assessment. So what we've got here in assessment, as you can see, is an authentic task. You're a delegate to the first annual Tropical Far North Queensland Youth Crime and Society Conference, sponsored by the State Government of Queensland to coincide with Law Week 2009. Okay, you've got to present a paper at this conference from the list of the following topics, your expertise. So what were the topics? Okay, here they go. We'll see if we can get this across. Haven't had much luck getting this across. Oh, there we go. As you can see, I was at Cairns High School at the time. I was teaching this and developed it, and doing the baccalaureate there. Again, here they're receiving their brief as a member of the conference, and here are the seminar topics that they've got to deal with. And as you can see, the topics are all argumentative, they're all genre specific, and they're all topical. Okay, where the students actually get to pick up a topic and conduct some real life research. And here's where my ICTs start to come into play. Okay, when I do my ICT map. So again, I go backwards. This is my learning sequence. This is my mini unit. Okay. And again, it's based on some work I've done in the past. So again, I'm just plucking this up by way of example. Let's talk ICT. Let's get back to Russell Stannard.
Really, the fact that technology in terms of digital technology and the possibilities of things from the introduction of Web 2.0, etc., that have really allowed for this move from what I call the inverted classroom to what we perhaps talk about now in the flipped classroom. And it's worth thinking about it, because see, what you've got now are many different resources that are available to students that we can either create as teachers or we can access them. Now, more and more teachers are learning to access content that's been built by other people or created by other people and left on the internet. So there's podcasts and videos and screencasts and quizzes and all sorts of things. So it doesn't necessarily mean to say that the teacher has to make all this learning content, because much of it is already on the internet and available for people.
Which is a really good point. So when I look at the little unit I just presented, at various stages I'd use podcasts, I'd use videos, and the assessment task actually required students to use screencasts, where they actually created a presentation and did a screencast of it, where they posted it to a conference website where it could be reviewed. Reading. As you can see, a lot of the articles are actually included with hyperlinks and embedded. Quizzes. I didn't do quizzes with this particular unit, but since then I've actually used Articulate, a piece of software to do lots of quizzes. And again, so many other activities that I've included in there, including just simple Word document downloads. Little cookie drops where you can create a HTML page. You've got to have your cookies turned on, but if you type into that page, it will save that page and it will reproduce it every time you open your resource. So what we've seen here is, a lot of this is happening at home, and a lot of it's happening at the senior student level, where there is a high component of self-directed learning. In the class, I spend my time dealing with all these tasks, the problem solving, the group work, pair work, presentations, class discussions, getting things up and running, getting the heady work of constructivism happening in my classroom. Now, when I go into my ICT map, you notice here a couple of really important things. If you can, do your ICT map phase by phase. So you can see here, phase 1 is orientation, phase 2 is rehearsal, and phase 3 for me was culmination. They're the 3 steps I use to explain my learning sequence. So in the orientation stage, I'm using a group wiki. I've put the whole class up there as in groups, and again to establish rules for engagement, to link to students in collaborative learning circles, and when they have to do a collaborative learning task, they go into the group wiki to do it. Now that's structured throughout the learning resource. Online concept mapping is another way you could do that. I don't particularly like it, okay, because I find it too cumbersome, but again, it's another way of doing it. Teacher can create the map, the students can copy the map, they can modify and elaborate as they plan their research. In my task, there were 15 topics. Students got a bit of free choice. I have a little bit of trouble where a teacher sets a topic and then sets the map, and then students have all of these great ICTs to go ahead and do this research. I mean, for me, that's just a little bit controlling, and it defeats the purpose. If it's skills, for instance, it may be in the manual arts and it's skills you're trying to teach, then definitely the teacher's got a strong curriculum warrant and pedagogical warrant to set the map. In legal studies dealing with morality, however, the teacher probably has less of a warrant to determine what's moral and ethical in the practices and minds of their students. And again, here's my purpose. Why am I using the group wikis? Okay, for engagement, to establish collaboration. Okay, why am I using the online concept mapping? Okay, to allow copying, development of concepts. Okay, to organise ideas, model links between concepts, teach how to categorise criminal offences. I've got digital video used by individual students. My purpose is to flip the classroom. I'm scaffolding the content. I'm challenging learner understandings, deconstructing learning understandings by providing videos which encourage them to challenge those. In the rehearsal phase, blogs, the internet, and the intranet. Now, this resource was posted on the internet. To make it mobile, they actually had to download it onto USB and make it mobile. The internet, of course, is the research component. The intranet is about the self-paced alignment, the curriculum sequence. And of course, the individual blogs, accessible work, and reflections. Okay. The final thing is the culmination. Again, I've used a group wiki with screencast video. Okay, they're working in as individuals and in learning circles and in pairs if two people select the same topic. Okay, and they're self-publishing a conference paper using screencast. There's peer review via the learning circle, and there's also panel review by external reviewers. Because at the end of the conference, one of the aims is to produce a paper, a best paper or most critical paper award, and you can come up with a whole range of awards, and you can have them, bestowed by external experts, and students get, they get the world, that what we call the contributory model. We get the outside world to value their learning, and they get to revalue their learning themselves as a result of that recognition. The last part of this week's work is your learner reflection. And again, it's about the points of interaction in your learning cycle. Now, you've covered this in weeks 1 to 6. You've got 3 phases in your sequence, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, whatever you want to call them. For each of those phases, you're going to create and link ICTs. Now, I've just showed you my ICT links in phases 1, phase 2, phase 3. You'll have your own. Okay? The learner reflection are going to be on ICTs that you've covered in weeks 1 to 6. The PLN, okay, we covered in week 8. So what you've got to do in this reflection is follow your learning sequence. Okay, what happened for the learner here? What happened here? Move phase by phase. Really important points. Don't repeat what you've said or done in Weebly. If you can, avoid screen captures. What I'd prefer you to do is link. Link to Weebly for any peer learning network activities, any comments, any reflections that you received. Link it to your Scoop It curated insight, to the comments there. That way I can just follow the link. You don't need to waste words repeating it, and you can save your precious assignment words for content, for adding value. If you're talking about someone else's comments, again, you're going to have to link to their Weebly. Okay? Where you've made comments in someone else's Weebly, or where someone else has drawn attention to your work or to your ideas. It's important to link to their Weebly. We don't want to sort of blow our own trumpets here. What we're doing is we're creating evidence here that our PLN was working. You may want to look at the limitations of the PLN. We were all running according to different time sequences. In other words, we weren't on the same page. Our peers, as peers, we were doing different activities. We weren't focused on the same learning steps. We were out of sequence. The net result was the peer learning activity became a little bit of a burden and a bit of a chore. So, again, recruiting people to your PLN was also a challenge. Comment on some of these. But the ICTs, don't forget, you've done a lot of review, a lot of reflection already in weeks 1 to 6. If you use those ICTs, then, give yourself a pseudonym and use your own reflections. There's no need to come up with these anew. And what we're looking at here is the whole purpose of the PLN fitting in here. Okay, where you're engaging, transitioning from a content-oriented online course through to a community of practice. How far did that transition go? Was it a complete transition? If not, why not? Okay, what happened in the PLN? Okay, what ICTs would you use? Okay, which ICTs help to strengthen the group, help increase professional knowledge? and which ICTs also helped in knowledge construction. Okay, give the value of that. Which did you find were of little help and of no real contribution or value adding? So this is how we're doing that final reflection. Okay, we're actually putting some beef and some words into that structure. The final words for this task come from Nathan Bock, who we introduced very early in the piece, Nathaniel Bock. And again, the learner reflection. You know, this is a really nice, concise finishing statement.
In Think Big, we have many people exploring varying interests. For example, my desk. And behind my desk, I have a friend who has interests in video game design. Next to me is an aspiring writer. And around the room, we have interests ranging from nursing to metalwork to sports and music. Not only do we gain the concentrated learning that comes from designing it ourselves, but we also are encouraged to, in moderation, discuss our learning with others so we gain a more varied coverage of the curriculum like that of normal class. In conclusion, school is changing, and there is a need for this change. School is no longer the place all learning occurs, rather it is the place where learning begins.
Right, now just to pose that there, I mean, poise that there, it's a really interesting point. Did your PLN deliver that for you? In your mini unit, what has changed? How have you SAM'd traditional teaching practices? Now, make those things explicit. At the end of the day, if you have a pedagogical map, if you have curated resources in Scoop It, if you have prioritised those in conjunction based on feedback from your PLN or your learning circle, if you've selected a mini unit from that information, and if you've developed that mini unit, if you have attached ICTs to each phase of that teaching sequence, and if you have completed a learner reflection based on your membership to the PLN and also to your experience of the ICTs, then you have completed a sequence. Alright, hopefully we'll chat some more about this at the end of the day on the Zoom. Thank you.